I love you all. I just want to start by saying that because I love that we can trade again. I love that we have the podcast going. It's a day of love. And probably the thing I love the most about this right now is it's not just the three normal hosts that you have on here, but we have the commissioner. We have the Clawless, the Green Bay Packers, the OG of the league, but not just of the league. For those of you who go back to Game of Thrones, when we did this for the first time, when Jeremy, myself, Santi, and Lewis were bored as hell on a Friday night and decided, you know what, let's have a little podcast and just do something to entertain ourselves because we're really freaking bored right now. That's where this all came from. So the OG Commission of the League, the OG of the podcast itself, having Jeremy on here is kind of fantastic now. Plus, changelog commission moves that we got to talk about. So, Jeremy, thanks for joining us.
Of course. I think you left out because Eric was involved in our original Game of Thrones, the current Bills owner.
Yeah, he worked his way in there. I think he was one of the regular hosts, but I think the original podcast was
he wasn't in the first
Santi. One. Yeah, okay. I think the first one was Yumi, Santi, and Lewis. But again, I could be wrong. My memory has not always been the best of things, but either way, it's a good occasion and a good time when we get you on here. And like I said, a lot to talk about in terms of some of the change log. First and foremost, trading is open again, so hopefully you guys are making asses of yourself by sending all sorts of crazy trades all over the league. But on the more fun standpoint, we had a lot of changes in the bylaws here, a lot of impactful changes. So it's really great that Jeremy can be on so we can go through kind of step by step and say what that means for the changes to the rules. Hopefully this is not just good for now for the owners on, but we've got a couple of replacement owners potentially coming in. I'm trying to, myself put legislative action in place to block the Falcons from leaving. He didn't go for a three-peat, so he's not allowed to leave. But we'll figure out if that's going to be successful or not. But Jeremy, how does it make sense to go through this? Do you just want to start from the top, or?
Yeah, we can just go through it. I tried to put the changelog in actual order of the bylaws this time to make it easier to follow. So we can just go top down if you want.
Okay, so let me scroll down to that. So first and foremost, adjusted the league calendar to push back the rollover date by 1 week. Is that based off of MFL or?
Oh, no, that was it's something we should have done last year, or actually 2 years ago, whenever we added week 18, because February 14th was always our rollover date, Valentine's Day. That's always what it was since the startup. But when the NFL added a week to the schedule, it pushed the Super Bowl back. And so we ran into an issue the past couple of years where rollover date was basically like immediately after the Super Bowl. And Chris and I were talking about like that's kind of a lot to put on people to try and because there's a lot of things you have to finish up right there before rollover. And we should have pushed it back anyway because there used to be a gap between the Super Bowl and rollover. And then suddenly there wasn't, and we never really adjusted for that. So that was just to give that gap how it used to be.
Okay, no, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I'm a little nostalgic because I kind of like the idea of forcing people to make priority choices on Valentine's Day, but it is what it is.
And maybe we find some other way to make Valentine's Day important. Next is adjusted league overview section on how player stats to clarify how players are ranked. Does it make sense to me to scroll up to?
Yeah, and it's up in the top. It's in the overview section. So in that part that says player stats, let me see if I'm looking at.
Okay, so
above the calendar, there's above the calendar.
Oh, above the calendar.
Page 1. Yeah, keep going. Well. It's up there in that very first page. There's a section on player stats, and basically that was where we tried to clarify even before this change, how we calculate stats. But we also talked about it in the extensions page, in the renegotiations page, and there was some kind of conflicting language and renegotiations, especially when it comes to rookies that use the renegotiation table, even though they're not renegotiations. It was all very confusing for especially new owners about exactly what stats do we use when we're ranking players. And so what we wanted to do was clarify it in one place so that almost everything uses this process for determining a player's rank. And so you see there's two stretches of time from rollover to the trade deadline of a current season, and then from the trade deadline to the following rollover. And the way it works is pre-trade deadline, you take the previous season. That's what you look at first.
Mm-hmm.
And unless they didn't play 8 games that season, and then you look at just the last 8 games they played, period, which can include the current season. Post-trade deadline, you look at the current season, but the same rules apply. If they haven't played 8 games, then you just count the last 8 games. This is how we've always done it. So it's just people always had questions, especially new owners would come in and say, which do I use when I'm looking at rookies? And so we just wanted to put it all in one place, hopefully to make it clear.
No, I appreciate that. And I know I was one of the ones who was asking, I think with Deontay Johnson last year, like, how do I count this? Do I count it based off of the 8 last year? When do I not count it? Can I roll over and count like, this or that? So clarification here is definitely helpful, I would say. So change 6G about extensions, which do not require comparison to other players' salaries, are again permitted after rollover. So I think that was, again, there's the trade extension aspect of this. So what were the particular extensions that you meant by this, so we can maybe go out of the negative?
Well, this one is actually more of a quality of life for me and Chris bylaw change because we limited extensions between rollover and the rookie draft. And that was a change. I think it was 3 years ago. We changed that because people were able to extend rookies. And there was one other criteria I can't remember, but the players that use the renegotiation table. But that table isn't useful if you don't have free agents assigned contracts yet, because that's a whole lot of players that don't have salaries that are market value. And so the point of the renegotiation table is that you're assigning a player a contract that matches their market value. And so that was the idea, is that, okay, we just don't allow extensions from this time to this time. And then the year after we made that rule, we realized, oh, wait, but trade extensions, that's going to limit trading. And we don't want to limit trading. That's kind of what the best part of this league is, people trading. And so by not allowing trade extensions, that limits trading. So we'll say, okay, we can allow trade extensions. We just don't calculate the salary. And what that ended up making is just this huge backlog of extensions that I would have to apply once the rookie draft was over. And it's just really time consuming. And so the idea was, okay, the only extensions that will be paused are extensions that use the renegotiation table. That's specifically going to be players on their rookie contract. And I'm feeling really bad. I think there's one more scenario, but if it references the renegotiation table, that means that that's going to be paused. But otherwise, we'll process extensions or trade extensions as normal.
Okay, excellent. No, I mean, like I said, quality of life, because trying to keep track of 3 pages worth of trade extensions, saying logged, when it was logged, and things like that. I can only
and trying to do it in order, and then finding out which one couldn't happen anymore because a previous one, a team had done 3 extensions that were on pause. It's just it creates weird situations where a trade happened because they were expecting an extension, but then they don't have the money, 3 months later, and then it doesn't happen, and now that the trade looks ridiculous. It wasn't very realistic, and we didn't like it.
So those of you in chat may have seen that I responded to check the bylaws, check the exchange laws, things like that, with a hallelujah. This is where that started. So change to a bylaw that a player, the team's trading a player, may not trade that same player back until after the championships. Jeremy will agree. I was one of the owners and teams that was responsible for this being in there in the first place, because it was basically a trade where we were trading cap back and forth. I think we got a lot of the bad behavior, including that of myself, out of the league. And frankly, we don't do a lot of this stuff anymore. But basically, that's been changed now. That the changeover point isn't a full calendar year, but the championships of the league.
Right. And you guys know that this one was always hard for us to catch anyway, and often involved another owner pointing out, hey, wait, they traded these people 8 months ago, and then us having to go back and retroactively reverse trades, which that's never fun for anybody to do, especially if moves have happened since we realized the mistake. And the original idea was, as Mike says, to prevent people from, loaning players or exchanging those sorts of things that are outside the scope of the league. But realistically, from trade deadline to the championship, that's plenty of time that you had that player that you put in your dues, for better or worse. You had that player for that amount of weeks, and so after that point, we don't have to keep track of it anymore.
Yep. No, fantastic. So this next one I want to spend some time on. So noted in bylaw 13, procedure for player tags will change following the 2023 championship. So let's lead off with the most important question about this. 2023 championship means next year's championship, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So basically 1 year from today is when this will start.
So I'll scroll up to bylaw 13 because even I can't miss that one. All this area, I believe, in yellow, correct?
Yeah, yellow will be what the above text will be replaced with following that time.
So each team will have 3 tags to sign back their own free agents, player with 1 year remaining on there. Exclusive franchise player, non-exclusive franchise player, and transition tag. The tags may only be placed on player with 1 year remaining. Exclusive franchise players will receive an additional year on their contract and a salary equal to the average of the top 5 players at their position, or a 20% raise, whichever is greater. Non-exclusive is top 10 or 20% raise, whichever is greater, will also be subject to bidding. So basically, exclusive is top 5, but people can't bid on it. Non-exclusive is top 10, but people can bid on it, similar to how we've had franchise players in the past. And transition tag, similar situation, but for lower draft compensation. And then I believe if I read this correctly, Jeremy, the RFA tag has dropped off.
Correct. And so this one kind of came about because, Chris and I have been talking about changing tagging for a while. The past 2 years have seen such an exponential growth in people tagging players, tagging kickers, Mike. And it's just gotten kind of out of hand and completely unrealistic. And Chris tried to talk about this on the last podcast that you guys had, that one of the first things we look at is this realistic? Does this have a comparable element in the real NFL? And the way our tagging currently is not. It's not realistic whatsoever.
Hold on. When you say tagging kickers, the 49ers 2 years ago tagged Robbie Gould with a franchise tag.
Okay. How many kickers have been tagged in NFL history?
Let's take a look.
How many have been tagged in our league in the last 5 years?
I understand our league is overextended on some of these things, but let's not pretend that this is not league behavior.
Okay. All right. I guess that's fair, but it's not really. But the point was I went and did
punter and I tagged a punter. So you're absolutely right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I went and started doing some research, which was probably a bad idea, and trying to read about how the real NFL does tags. And as with many things in the bylaws, when I realized they're messed up, Lewis kind of wrote the whole tagging system. He based it on some other leagues that we were in previous to this. And I just kind of trusted his judgment at the time, and then never really looked back at it. But when I was doing my research on how actual tagging works in the NFL, it wasn't comparable in any way at all. It didn't match in any. Restricted free agency, for example, that's not a tag. That's something that is on players that have been on a team under 4 years, and then but we're not on rookie contracts. It's kind of complicated who matches that criteria, and then the way that they get that declaration, it doesn't fit with a tagging system. So that is something I've kind of just tabled. And then I even told Chris, is like, this is something we'll probably look at in the future if we want to re-add what restricted free agency looks like in our league. But it's not appropriate for it to be part of the tagging system. It's not a tag. It's something different. So looking at what the actual NFL has is, they have franchise tags and they have transition tags. And then franchise is broken into two groups. There's the exclusive and non-exclusive. And so I was looking at ways to make that match. Now, in the real NFL, the non-exclusive, it's not the top 10. It's still the top 5, but they average the top 5 from the last 5 years of the NFL at the position. And so, of course, that's going to be lower because the cap keeps going up. And so for our league, I didn't want to do that. So I just said, okay, top 10 is probably pretty close to what makes sense. And that's what we've already been doing. The real NFL is a 20% raise, not 10% like what we've been doing. So that's why I did that, the 20% raise, which should also discourage retagging, just like the real NFL, right? Every time you tag, it gets pretty ridiculous and not conducive to being able to do. So that was kind of the idea there. In the real NFL, the exclusive franchise player, they're on the team. Nobody else has a say in it. Non-exclusive teams are allowed to bid, and the original team has right of refusal. But they get, if they let go of the player in the real NFL, they get 2 first-round picks. Now, I talked to Chris about this a little bit. That seemed excessive for our league. I may revisit that in the future, seeing it, once we put this into place. But a single first round seemed fitting with as what we already do. So that's why we stuck with the individual first round pick. Now, transition is a little different because there's no bid compensation, and the team making the tag has right of first refusal. So that's what we put in place, that they get that top 10 players' salary. The other teams can bid them up however they want, but the original team can keep the player, but there's no pick compensation. So basically, they're just going to get what the league values them at. And that's kind of the risk you take by transition tagging a player.
So the question I want to ask here, Jeremy, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, go for it.
So it's something that we had talked about as one of our suggestions. And I think RJ may have had as the suggestion, I may have kind of jumped on it, is if we look at how the real NFL does franchise tagging or tags like this, is often they will put the tag on the player to avoid losing the player and then work out a long-term deal. Like you look at a lot of quarterbacks where it's okay, we're going to tag the player. As part of having the tag, they were able to work out a long-term deal and then the tag comes off, things of that nature. So a lot of the suggestion there was utilizing a tag to be able to extend a deal on a player who was, say, 1 year left on the deal. Obviously, that complicates the use of the tag or things of that standpoint. Did you guys consider that at all in terms of ads, or is that something that you guys are kind of keeping on the notepad, or where is that?
That's on the notepad. That's something that basically I wanted this on the board so that the league had time to look at it. And then over the next year, while people consider it and implications, and the podcast, of course, I'm sure it's going to be discussed ad nauseum. We can generate more ideas. And then when we do our, bylaw revision next year, it's something that we can incorporate without it being such a big change. I didn't want this kind of thing to happen when we only have a month until tags go into place. That's not fair to owners. And so putting it just there. So it's basically, this is the review year for people like yourselves to look it over and offer ideas like you're saying. And then we can make the tweaks that might be beneficial, but aren't huge major changes to the entire, structure of the league.
So to go to more of like the realism, the NFL has now placed a limit on how many times you can franchise a player. Are we planning on doing the same thing?
Right now, no. I really think that the natural progression of that 20% increase is going to solve itself. for franchise players, especially since you're looking at the kind of players that get tagged. They've already gone through their rookie deals. A lot of them are going to be fifth-year option players that have already gotten that increase in pay, or they've gone through free agency. So they're going to be really expensive players. So until we see the need for that, we probably won't go that route. But maybe.
Okay. And then when you say they receive an additional year, you're talking like when you franchise someone, they get 2 years.
Right, because you tag them in this year, right? Right now, you declare the tag, and how we do that is I go in and I add a year, so it looks like they have 2 years. Yeah. And then when we do the rollover and I reduce everyone by a year, the tag players then have 1 year at that point.
So, I'm not sure if the timeline falls with this before rollover purposes, but can you tag and renegotiate or tag and extend?
No, because the final salary isn't declared until after rollover, because that's when the bidding opens up.
Okay. So there's no change to how it's been. It's just different phrasing.
It's different phrasing and the pick compensation and the holdout part, which we haven't talked about yet.
Okay. That holdout part is pretty fucking...
That's a big portion to this. And that was another thing, right? And that's what I was talking to Chris about, and I think some other people in the league, that, in the real NFL, players do not want to be tagged. That's not something that they desire. And our league, tagging prevented them from holding out, which that was not realistic. And so the idea was, okay, you can do this, but players want long-term contracts if they're at that level. And so they are more likely to hold out. And so if you use a franchise tag, they automatically go into the holdout list. So that's the point where I do the 33% chance for each person. And if it triggers yes, then they are holding out. So anybody that you franchise tag has a 33% chance of holding out.
See, now I just almost want to franchise tag my punter to see if I can get my punter.
So if they are held out, you then have the ability to extend them.
Right. It's just like the normal holdout rules. At that point, you would give them the additional raise and then assign them a contract, kind of look at the holdout. But I think you get kind of a range of what. Let me look. Let's see. You can
take the hit. You can
add a minimum of 1 year. So you can add as many years as you want, as long as you assign them that raise. Okay. Then you can give them as many years as you like at that point. Yeah, because that's what the player's after. They want a long-term guarantee. So
it's kind of fun. It sounds like you kind of just want them. If you're going to franchise them, you want them to be held out, so you can actually have the ability.
It depends on where the money's at and how expensive they are, because we're talking about 20% raise, and then an additional 10% for the holdout.
Yeah, but our cap's going up pretty consistently, like 10%. So it's an interesting.
He says after a 2-year span where our cap was frozen.
I'm sorry. You signed how many people to $42 million contracts this year? I don't want to hear it.
Okay, so here's the scenario. Like I'm just looking at the wide receivers. If you want to franchise any of the quality wide receivers, there's one option. You're gonna have to trade with Jeremy to get him. It's Devontae Adams. Then you have to hope that there's a 1/3 chance that he holds out, and then you're probably going to have to pay him more than Keenan Allen.
I mean,
Keenan's a
luckily I get to tag Adams under the old rules this year, so.
Right. I'm just using this in like.
No, I know.
I understand. Like I do understand the like now there's an increased chance of holdout with the tags, which like gives you the chance to add, but like I don't know. There's not a massive amount of players with 1-year deals that you would want to go through that jump through those type of hoops to just hope for a third of a chance.
But what I think it will do is I think it will definitely increase the level of involvement people are willing to give a first for this year, just to have them on multi-year deals going into this change next year. Yeah. To avoid paying a guy like Devontae $50 million instead of 30. I think that's going to be a very fun tag period this year because of that change.
Yeah. and again, this is something like Jeremy said, we've got some time to continue to think about how we can continue to make this better. This is what's on the table right now as we think about some of the additional improvements we could potentially make to this based off of last pod's conversations and further conversations. We can incorporate that. So that's, again, a great first start. Another one of these changes that is near and dear to my heart is the removal of the bylaw which prevents teams who would cut a player from being the first to sign them. So, like I said, completely understand why this was there. Let's take the player who was of a certain contract value, cut him, re-sign them, and save ourselves, $6 million in the process. The one thing I want to confirm about this, Jeremy, before we get too far into it, is there any kind of time restriction from cutting of the player to re-signing them?
As long as they go through the whatever in-season or off-season procedure for testing the open market. So like in season, right? If you cut a player, they have to go through waivers, and then they go through the next off-season or in-season free agency bidding process. So you can join into that process as long as you are being tested against the league on what you think they're worth. Off-season, of course, they'll go up on the open bidding display, and everyone has a chance to bid on them. So the idea is that they still get their value as the league determines, and you're allowed to participate in that.
What's the penalty for them? I might be missing it, but is there a penalty for reacquisition? Like, do they have to keep?
No, I mean you take that 50% cap hit from cutting them, and then any future year cap hits, depending on how many years they had. But that part stays. Okay. But there's no additional penalty if you were to reacquire them.
So let's use Chase Edmonds, for example. He was a $6.3 million cap hit, 3 years left when I cut him. So I would retain the 3.15 cap hit this year, as well as future year cap hits. If I then chose to re-sign him for, say, $650K, he would count 1 year, $650K against my contract with the cap hits associated with when I cut him in the first place.
Right. Mm-hmm.
All right.
So again, the only thing that, again, I don't want to dislike any of these improvements. I am concerned that there's definitely, I'll call it a dead period in the off-season free agency process where everyone gets really excited and bids the crap out of people for the first couple of weeks, and then there's kind of maybe I'll call it a month period after that where people continue to nominate, bid, and everything on that. But then there's almost I guess I'll call it a dead period, basically in the July to August standpoint, where somebody could probably recycle some of these cap hits during that period that I'd be a little concerned about, that I don't think they could do during some of the early free agency for offseason or some of the in-season free agency. But otherwise, like I said, I love this change. I think it makes a lot of sense and adds realism to the league.
There's always going to be ups and downs, but I think this is going to be fun.
I mean, we'll see, and we can always revisit if a change we make has detrimental effects. But I think, like you described, the reason this was in there is not really adequately being addressed by how the previous rule was. It's not really necessary because they're still testing free agency. They're still getting whatever the league markets them as. And yeah, we'll see. The chips will fall.
No, again, I love it. This next one, I laugh because it's been a long bragged about loophole I've been taking advantage of. And I'm glad to see it being closed because it's better for the league in this way. So comp picks being awarded to cornerbacks and D tackles lost to free agency, because based off the rules, if you're looking at a top certain level player at free agency, corners and D tackles were very easy to find somebody who qualified. And hey, congratulations, you've got yourself an extra third round pick. So I think this makes a lot of sense. Maybe after a couple of years, there's a way that we recycle into this. But for now, I think it's nice to close the loophole.
Right. I mean, ideally, long term, we're able to find a way that make corners more valuable. But I mean, it's not realistic right now with how points are reported in MFL. So as long as that stands, yeah, it doesn't make sense. And I actually went and counted for the last couple of years how comp picks figured out, and corners and tackles were double or triple the number of comp picks for any other position. Interestingly enough, last year receivers earned 0 comp picks, which I thought was kind of interesting.
So I do have a quick question about the D tackle side of this. So position changes between D tackles, D ends, linebackers happen a ton. Is there any consideration in there of position change? So if someone was a D tackle and they're lost to free agency, but they're switched to a D end, does that make them eligible to a comp pick versus, another way? If it's a D end that switches to a D tackle in free agency.
I thought that we made that a rule change this year to specify player positions. Is not in there. Hold on.
Again, it was one of those where I think it was of that, but I wanted to make sure it carried over for this exemption as well. So
I may have forgotten that. This is a good point. I may have not put it into the change log, but anytime a player's position is considered, it's going to be at the time of whatever thing is happening. So if it's extensions, it's at the time the extension's happening. That position they're currently at is the position we'll be using. At the time a comp pick is assigned, it's the current, whatever their position is at when the comp pick is assigned. Okay. That's what we'll be doing going forward. Oh, God, we added that in there, but I must have not put it in the change log, and I am very apologetic for that.
No, this is why we do this. This is why we review it, why we make sure we understand it, so that A, the broader league understands it. Mostly A, so I understand. B, so I understand it.
And that's one of those ones again where it's how it's always been done. That's always how I do it. Is when I go in extensions, I look at what their position is right now, but it wasn't ever specified in the bylaws. So,
all right.
So in a comp pick, it's the position they're at 2 weeks before the rookie draft when we assign comp picks.
Okay.
Comp picks, if you trade them after the deadline, like during the period we're in now, they're still not eligible for comp picks if they're traded, right? You have to have them at the time of the deadline.
Correct. As of the trade deadline, week 8 or 9 or whatever it was of this year, when they would be dropped off of at rollover.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's see here. Taxi claims. When teams cap space will be checked for taxi claims and clarify taxi claims within 24 hours. It seems like clarification of language just to make sure everyone understands when, what, and how, right?
Oh, right. This was the one that was like, it was kind of implied if you read through the rule, because it said that any claims that were still active on a player when their kickoff happened would be declared invalid. But then we would have people declaring, and then I would have certain individuals saying, isn't that not going to be valid? And I would say, yeah, it won't be, but right now it clicks. And so it's just annoying. It was just an annoying rule. So now it's just like, okay, now we can tell people, if you declare it within 24 hours, it's not valid.
Cool. Yeah. Make your lives easier. Because it should be, because last thing we need to do is complicate this. Last but not least, adjusted the 24-hour clock for IR violation based off of kickoff the player's game. I think this is something that actually happened to me, for example, where like either Chase Young or someone like that was going to get activated, but after a lot of players had played their games, or it was going to be one Monday night game or things as that standpoint, just clarifying, hey, that's when this is going to happen. And sometimes shit happens that things happen for Monday night games that don't happen for Sunday night games, and how we're going to handle them.
Yeah, and this one, because I don't want to discourage people from, taking certain things in their own hand and letting people know when they have IR violations. But at the same time, it's not fair for someone who can't do anything just to lose a player. And, it happened a couple times this year where I kind of felt my hands tied. I'm like, well, the rules say this, and that really sucks, and I don't want that to happen. So now, if you happen to be notified and you don't have time to promote, you'll have a little bit of time on Tuesday to promote them.
Perfect. All right. So that's going through all of the changes. Bill, RJ, any of these that you want to spend a little bit more time on than we have so far? Or?
Nothing I need to go over here. I don't know, RJ. Is there anything you want to go over?
No, I'm appreciative of the steps being taken with franchising, and not all being rolled out in some large
Yeah.
complicated change.
Yeah.
Because I did want to see that changed, and I would like to be able to add more years to my super expensive players if I'm gonna have to pay them that much. But yeah, I like all of the changes so far.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm
I,
curious.
I do think we are in the first step of changing the free agency language as far as like reacquiring a player, but I think this is a step in the right direction, and somewhere along the lines it will be brought to our attention. Somebody will exploit it in some way, shape, or form, and then I'm sure it'll get changed from there.
Yeah. I'm curious if there was anything that you and Chris went over that was like real close to getting added, but you guys just decided not to do it this year.
Let me go look over the notepad real quick.
You know what it was? It was clearly expansion of the league. Or the addition of a trade czar.
Yeah, is that basically just Matt's job now? Just to notify everybody.
Some things we talked about, but ended up nixing. We talked about if we needed to even have a maximum number of extensions, because that's one of those things in the real NFL. They can extend any number of players they want to, but we felt like we wanted to encourage free agency as much as possible, since there's already so few players that reach free agency, that limiting that would be not beneficial to the league at large. And also that would take away one of the benefits from winning your division.
I can agree with that. If we want our free agency to at least have some like noteworthy names, like if we don't cap, like if the extensions aren't capped, then that's just not a possibility.
Has there ever been consideration of going down from 3 to 2?
So the opposite direction of unlimiting
make
it.
free agency more impactful.
Something we consider. I mean, I don't think that free agency is in a horrible state right now. It's barren, but not in a way that I think is unfun. My opinion, right. And you're all free to disagree, and I hope that you would tell me. But I think that it's a good place right now, just for my sake. The other thing we talked about that we ultimately nixed was the cap floor. We were talking about how on cap floor weeks, teams make outrageous bids on the silly players, so they don't get hit by the cap floor and then cutting them. Ultimately, we didn't feel too strongly one way or the other on that, and at the end of the day, it seemed like anything to make contracts higher is probably a good thing. And so we left it as it was. So those are the two, I think, that we kind of went back and forth and just didn't go with for this year.
Yeah, I know that was something that Chris brought up during the last podcast, and I think it's something that we probably need a little bit more time to ruminate on. That there's probably better ways to do this so that it spreads the money throughout a roster. I think most competitive rosters can't do this. It's only going to be the tanking rosters or the rebuilding rosters. So there may be a way to do this. And again, some of the things that I know Chris was outright against of, hey, you can be fired and therefore you'd have to change a new team or things like that are probably not the first things that you guys would consider.
Right. He was making silly stuff at that point in your guys' conversation. I'm not about relegating or removing, from the league.
And again, I think there are some leagues that have that as a fun capability, but I think the idea is nobody gets removed from the league. Just you may have spent some time building your team, and hey, if you do things like this, you can get fired, and you would have to start over with a different roster, which some people will be in favor of, some might not be. But again,
I think I think when we talked about like just accruing of like of just like violations, like basically like circumventing rules, like I did like that idea, but it is a whole extra layer that is completely unnecessary.
That
Yeah,
must have been a post-recording conversation you guys were having.
it's very
it,
possible.
it bled into that. But I think the one that we did, the one that was like kind of an accumulation of like everybody just talking was uh, like in season like bids can't be X percentage higher than the highest paid player at that position. Like that feels like the cleanest way to prevent that. But
The
also
problem is
like
tracking it.
That way, there's no $80 million player.
Well, I mean, there's tracking it.
well,
Like,
no, like you can't
You can't ask Jeremy or Chris to do this, but this is a way that we could set MFL to say, okay, the cap of a player is this, then that's
well,
reasonable.
well you can't pay 200 per, like you can't double up an Aaron Donald contract like to just some random free agent because all of us, like, we all know nobody's going to be cut loose at that time period that would warrant that type of money. So it's obviously some type they're using it to like circumvent some type of rule to get around it. Our cap floor is the example. But like that, when we talked about it last week, that in my mind stood out as like the cleanest way that doesn't need any like real tracking. It's just a set rule of like you can't, like the highest, you can't pay any X percentage higher than the highest paid player in season bidding. Because you, of course, you'll still get the people that like will be underneath the highest paid player trying to do that, but it adds a wrinkle to them, but it doesn't add a wrinkle to the commissioners of tracking anything. It's just a hard set rule of, boom, you just can't do it. That's just my, it's the one thing that stood out to me and that I thought of after our pod, like it was something that I like thought of days after, like how how clean and simple it is, like needs no tracking. It's just statement. And like ideally when you are adding rules, you don't want to add layers where you have to track more things, add more,
Right. In these sorts of conversations, I always try to ask myself, okay, what could go wrong? If we did this, what could be the way it's abused, or what could be the bad thing? And so if you're setting that, what happens when a player is suddenly signed to a team that just lost its two top running backs, and you have three teams that know exactly what the maximum amount of that can be bid upon this player, and they all three bid that same amount? Then it falls apart, and then I have to make a call of who earned that player because they couldn't differentiate.
I mean, yes, we understand where you're coming from there. The other aspect is, what was bid on the top D end last year?
Like as a random player or as an actual player?
I feel like the ceilings for a lot of these players are fairly high.
I mean, it was Aaron Donald. It was like $35 million.
No, but I mean, I think even beyond that, I think there were some players who were at the 40 million levels, or Tom Brady at 48.
Right, but were they playing or were they free agents? Like, but was it an in-season acquisition? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
there's never going to be a free agent in season acquisition that would realistically warrant that type of money. At least that, in my opinion. And now I do actually agree with the issue. Like, there could be an issue where three people all, because there is like essentially a hard cap on what they could bid, like everybody bidding that, just knowing that that's the max, with that position being a need that week.
Could a solution to this potentially be like what we do in the off season, where you do your bidding and you have your max set at like 50, but the dollar just goes to 30, so that's what you pay. So like when you bid on random stupid free agents, you're only going to get them for 450. So you have to figure shit out more intensely as a team that's tanking.
So I want to keep ideating on this. I apologize for interrupting. I want to keep thinking about this. I want to keep working on this. but we're 45 minutes into the podcast, and we still have a good number of things that I think we want to cover here. So, Jeremy, do you want to make one last comment on this, and then we'll move on?
No. Hope you all enjoy, and there's not too many complaints.
Excellent. Okay, cool. So next thing I want to touch on, again, and we're 45 minutes in the podcast, is that we're losing 2 owners this year. And the 2 owners who have meant a lot to the league and meant a lot to the podcast, and I think meant a lot to our overall experience. So I want to make sure we spend some time talking about this. First and foremost, we heard a couple of weeks ago that the Chargers were planning not to return. Again, we think about what that means in terms of the podcast itself. Matt was one of the regulars. It was Matt and I, as RJ was getting himself integrated, as Bill was really finding his legs on the podcast, things of that standpoint, where we were, again, kind of the banner holders for who was getting on here and talking about the state of the league, what was going on, what we thought about things of that standpoint. And again, life gets busy, life gets crazy, and everyone unfortunately is pushed into positions where they got to figure out what time they have for things. So we've all seen situations where we've lost owners in other leagues because they just can't make it work in terms of their work-life balance. And seems like Matt's in a similar situation here. So we hope he stays in the chat channel. We hope he stays involved in the conversation. We think he's a great, voice of fresh air in many of these debates or otherwise. But he's definitely going to be missed as an owner in the league as we replace the Chargers. And then the other owner that we just found out today, and as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I may be filing an official complaint to try and cause an injunction. We joked about that if the Falcons won 3 straight titles, he was going to have to leave. We didn't intend that he had to leave regardless of whether he won or not. So again, it's one of those things where you never want to see it, especially for an owner like that. He was an owner that was rebuilding his team through the draft and made a lot of really good picks and really good trades at the right time. Built up a great roster and ran it to 2 straight titles, which is something that in a league of this kind of dedication, this kind of parity, this kind of swings of luck is completely unheard of. And winning 2 straight titles is incredible. And the fact that he had a legitimate shot at a three-peat in something as competitive as this was completely unheard of. So I congratulate him on his run of great performance and great luck in the league. And I am, again, even though it was against my team for many of these times, truly sad to lose him as a competitor, as someone that was great to sort of bounce things off of, talk shit against, things of that nature. I think he was a great asset to the league and a great owner. And you don't find Brett's in chat rooms. You don't find them on message boards. You find them after years of competing against them in leagues because they have the right combination of both skill, understanding, and frankly, attitude to both not take things too seriously, but also take them seriously enough to really double down and make sure they get the right value and balance of things. So losing one of a Matt or a Brett is an incredibly tough thing for a league like this. Losing both is terrible. Luckily, we have one of the best collection of owners in fantasy football as far as I'm concerned. So I think we're going to be just fine. But that being said, I wanted to make sure I spent a little time on this podcast to talk about both owners, talk about their impact to the league, talk about how much they've impacted me in terms of my enjoyment of fantasy football, and kind of make sure we thank them for the time they spent with us.
Well, for sure. I mean, I've known both of them for quite a while now in various leagues. And I hate when anybody quits, whether they're really really good owners or really terrible ones. It's frustrating, especially if they've been with the league a while and they've made effects and they've had a persona that everyone is aware of, and especially with the podcast, and we've all gotten to know Brett and Matt. I hate it. I hate it when both of them told me that they weren't going to be coming back. I think with Matt, we kind of had an idea this was coming. He over the last couple of years, he'd been off and on during the season. He never neglected his team, but I think we kind of saw this one coming. Brett was a little bit more of a surprise, but I mean, I understand their reasons, both of them. And no ill will towards either of them. I respect them for letting me know and not letting it drag out. And they left on good terms. I have my suspicions that Brett will take the goose path, and at some point in the future, reach out and say, you know what, is there an orphan?
Unacceptable.
He has to get handed the worst team. Like,
I mean, but that may be what it takes, though. I think because Brett has a bit of stubbornness to him, and so I think that if there was ever a team that was as bad of shape as the Steelers was when Lewis left, if we ever had a team like that, maybe that's what we could challenge Brett with, and he'd come back. But no, hats off to him. I love both of those guys, and so I don't fault them at all, and I'm glad for what they contributed. But it is what it is. We'll have some new owners in, and hopefully, Brett's offered to kind of offer some guidance to the new Falcons owner. He left that team in a rough spot going forward in as far as cap goes.
Absolutely not.
And just so that the air is clear, he didn't just dump. Like, he offered to set the team straight to get in a good position. It was my call to tell him that I wanted the new owner to make those choices, that they should have the decisions in their hands.
Talk about an ultimate time to come in on that team.
Although there is something to be said here. There is something to be said here about things being future Brett's problem.
Yeah.
And future Brett not being here.
He even said that. He even says, like, I hate, that's what they're going to say, is that I just blew it off because I knew I wasn't coming back.
Well,
and that's why he asked me to have, like, the off season to set the team in a better place. And I just said, I think that I would rather the new team have those choices. You can offer your advice or guidance or whatever, but it should be the new owner's choice going forward. And so, he tried to do the right thing, so don't fault him for that.
So we'll do this.
No.
We'll keep him in a place of honor, but if he takes the goose path and comes back, we're absolutely layering on the future Brett problem conversation.
Well, I think that's expected.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like the fair thing to do here.
So I think Matt, like, you have the division set up in the Discord. I think Matt and Brett, since they're apparently staying in the chat, they need their own division.
Well, okay. So you guys were talking about that earlier. Matt is no longer in the chat.
Oh, really?
Yes. And so this is another one of my calls, and so you guys can hate me for it, but only people who are members of the league can be in the chat. That's just I don't think it's appropriate. The trade czar stuff, it's all fun and stuff to talk about, but it's just, that's my call. I think that only people who are committed and are in the league itself should.
No, that's totally fine. I had no idea. I didn't even notice.
Yeah, I'm leaving Brett in for the time being.
So enough of this.
I'm leaving Brett in for the time being, so he can have his proxy period, and then when we get the new owner in, I'll introduce them, so whatever they want to talk about, they can, and then he'll go on his way as well.
And I will become trade czar.
That's not going to be a thing.
I definitely think that the one thing that's going to be, like, anybody can run a fantasy team, right? Like, anybody can do that. It really is the activity of the chat room that really brings it all together. Like, the league is just awesome because of the chat room. Like, the rules and the way you built the league out is one thing, but, like, bylaws are bylaws and the game is the game. But the fun that you have in the chat and doing stuff like the podcast, that's what it is. And Brett was in there every day. Like, just saying nonsense all the time. And Matt was there for a while. Matt was more of a podcast person, I feel like. And when I joined the league, I remember I was like, oh man, I don't know if I can really like talk shit about people. And Matt made that very clear. Oh, do your thing. Like, say whatever you want. And he didn't hold back either, which was awesome. But yeah, it was. I knew Matt was leaving probably last year. He was just like fading out, and then Brett was just a complete shock.
Yeah, I mean, we'll be honest because we could talk shit and we're all good. Matt's threatened to quit every year for like the last 5 years. So that the fact that he actually followed through with it 1 year is like, oh, okay, fine, this is the year then. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just going to be different. Like,
but that's the thing about these leagues. We evolve. No league stays the same. We continue to bring in new owners, bring in new rules, bring in new tweaks to make the leagues our own. And that's what keeps these leagues fun. None of us are seeking out NFL GM leagues because we don't want a certain experience, and we don't want experiences to change to match what we would hope to have there. So, I mean, I admire that's something that we're all continuing to strive for and continuing to make sure we have in our fantasy football experiences. So, okay, enough sad. Actually, you know what? One more sad thing. I'm going to talk about the first trade.
Yes. I want my attention.
This
I was really hoping while you guys were talking that some other trade would come through so we could kind of
I was hoping
that.
So was I. Again, I wish I had more fun things to trade, but because I don't have picks anymore, and that's the sexy thing everyone wants right now. Bill, taking on. Let me
just
scroll back up.
You don't even need to
look.
You don't need to.
God forbid I don't include any of these very important pieces. Randall Cobb, Sammy Watkins, James Mitchell, Chris Tonga, Jacoby Durant, Bill Jackson, Duke Shelley, and DeAndre Houston Carson, and a 2024 fifth.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you for hanging on to $5 million of expiring cap space for a first-round pick.
Bill got more points in that trade for free than he had all season.
We should take end of year point totals into account for a draft order.
Exactly. Oh man.
I don't know how long RJ was sitting on that joke to make it, but I'm so glad he
That's
did.
the only reason he's on tonight.
Like, as soon as you saw it, he's like, "This is the joke I'm going to make in an hour and a half." And he did, and he nailed it. So, golf clap to you, good sir.
No, just something to do. It's nothing crazy, nothing spectacular. I don't have a lot to work with this off season, so I figured if I can get more pieces for at least 2 weeks, I can have something to try to work with.
I'm going to take this opportunity to reach out to all teams that are holding on to quite a bit of empty cap space. Wait. There's a lot of teams with a lot of dead shit that they're going to try and unload. Please don't take a 2024 fifth for them. You can get more.
You can. You can even get a current fifth.
Maybe even a fourth could be your floor.
So here's the part that I didn't realize when I took that deal, right? So I have to extend Marquise Brown off of a fifth-year option. And
all right, just trade him to me.
Well,
you want to talk about fifth-year option problems?
Well, here's the part. Taking on the $3.5 million from Goose keeps me from extending and renegotiating him down to where I have the cap space for it. So I have to do a lot of cutting or whatever. And I didn't know this whenever I was looking at my cap situation and his offer. So yeah. So that's fun. I got work to
So
do.
this is a cautionary tale,
Yeah.
dear viewers.
Goose is already on his game.
Yeah. Yeah. So in other words, Hollywood is available.
Oh, really?
See, you could have skipped everything else you said and just said that, and the value would have been there.
I mean, Hollywood's there. Desmond Ritter, Sam Howell, got all the talent.
Hall of Famer Sam Howell, because I mean, obviously we expect that kind of performance out of every game for the rest of his career.
Yeah. No, but I mean, he looked great against Dallas, though. Like, I'm impressed.
But I mean, gentlemen, welcome back. Here we are. It's time to make some trades because hope springs eternal for all of the players with bad years, for all the players who had one or two good games. The future is now. Strike while the iron is hot. And for those trying to dump cap, come stronger than a 24/5. Please, for me, for the memory of Brett and Matt, it's what they would have wanted. They wouldn't want you to act like this. Especially Matt. All right. This has been a good hour of conversation here. We'll jump into the fun part of the podcast here. Jeremy, anything you want to add to close out here in terms of bookkeeping, business keeping, things like that?
No, I think that touched on a good point. Make sure you guys are looking at your fifth-year options when you're looking at extensions, renegotiations. Make sure you're thinking about how many picks you have for the next year's draft. The raise in cap isn't always as much as you think it might be, so just make sure you have enough space when you make those moves.
Absolutely. All right. Well, again, gentlemen, appreciate the time, appreciate the participation, and appreciate the passion. And, when we get the new Chargers and Falcons, we'll welcome them into the league with open arms. They've got a lot to live up to, but, for the time being, let's get the training going. Please, for the love of God, don't let the only trade on the opening night of this be Bill and Goose's cap dump. We can all do better. Even I might get involved to make sure this isn't the only trade for the opening night. Who knows?
I got a bunch of picks that I'll let go tonight just to make this possible.
Send them back.
All right. Bye, Brett.